We are about to embark on an immersive journey through the corridors of our minds. Stand by as we prepare for departure.
Welcome aboard, everyone, to the Productivity with Peace of Mind podcast adventure. Our journey will begin in just a moment. Inhale deeply and exhale. Our voyage takes us on a captivating tour, diving deep into the intricate layers of our thoughts and imagination. Brace yourselves for the complexities of our evolution. For a safe and enjoyable journey, stay seated, secure your helmet and protective goggles, and keep hands, feet, and legs inside while the ride is moving. Now relax and enjoy.
Today we have with us Sydney Ledden, founder of Sentio Design Studio. She blends interior design, product design, and user experience to optimize physical and digital, so our online environments as well. So we're going to talk about today how the design of our environments impact how we feel and what we think and what we're experiencing and how we function every single day. So, no matter what it is we're doing online or what we're seeing in front of us in our lives, that impacts us more than we realize. So, welcome, Sydney. It's so great to have you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been an interesting kind of journey of how I not fell into this, but in a way. And I have from a young age, an early career, really enjoyed kind of product development and design,
Mhm.
and was able to work across physical product. And then, part of that is somewhat the marketing in a way, and started with web design, and that's kind of broadened out into apps or digital products. And I have a big passion for how user experience and these kind of design principles or just subconscious interactions we have affect our experience and our engagement with like you said, physical or digital space. And I think I haven't met or come across a single product or just digital product that didn't need someone to look at that. That's what
Yeah.
designers do. There's always an architect or a general
Yeah.
contractor, right? And there's maybe a software engineer, but my job as a designer is to kind of focus on the power of improving how people interact in those small details.
That's really cool. And I'm just curious, like, why that's so important to you. Like, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I started my education in like biology, and specifically like pre-med, so things like just psychology and like neuroscience were always these very interesting topics to me. But like my job was working with artisan makers in college, and so I kind of started to think about like not only how like the artisans are thinking about making their product, but like how their users, number one, a hard part that artisans deal with is like translating that, right? They maybe know why they want to make something or the technicality, but some things are purely form in art, but I think the best art or design can improve our lives, whether it is simply beauty, but a lot of times there's a function behind it. So for a while I was into like furniture and kind of like artisan furniture. And I always loved it because it's kind of hard not to like it. But
Yeah.
me, it was beyond the woodworking, and it was kind of like how people are engaging with these things. And then I kind of had the task of creating like websites and ways for these artisans to showcase and like visually communicate, right? this very physical thing when they oftentimes had trouble. So for me, it's kind of like it's problem solving, not only visual communication, but also sometimes even with these products, when you're designing and prototyping, like you're getting direct feedback. So yeah, I think for me it was not only this business aspect, but also like the thought process behind the user. And even right now with business owners that maybe have like an app idea, or a homeowner with like a renovation idea, right? Sometimes what's in our mind is really hard to translate. And I think I'm kind of obsessed with learning how to translate that well, and not just for my clients, but potentially for more so their demographic that they're trying to build this for.
Yeah, yeah, that's super cool. It's interesting how there's like the input piece of like I'm having so much joy creating this for you and making this a good experience for you. And then there's that other side of this kind of art where the person is receiving it and actually experiencing it, and then they're getting to enjoy that as well.
Yeah, and sometimes it doesn't align, right? Sometimes you think you have this like
Yeah.
beautiful thing that you want to make, and then you get back data, right? You get back ideally user data. You do a lot of user research up front, but it is this interesting process to see like, well, maybe I thought my demographic was this in the market and it really wasn't. And there's all these ways we can improve, right? To me, all of this is like really prototyping and iteration to figure out like how a space can evolve to be its best version of itself for the user. And I think this is applicable to, obviously like simply websites or apps, but also like we work with many companies that are maybe a retail space. So they have a literal user flow of how someone walks into their store, what direction they start to move through, how they pick things for their cart, when they go to
Mhm.
check out, how was their customer experience? And then maybe they also use like e-commerce, right, from this company too. So we work with oftentimes people or business owners that have physical and digital space and want to ensure they're providing value across both. And that's kind of like where I find this like beautiful kind of mixture of digital and physical space. But sometimes we work with a digital product that doesn't have a brick and mortar, so you're trying to really create engagement and maybe like community, right? Without being able to have like a customer service agent there or this wonderful store experience, whether it be like when you go to a restaurant, you sit down, your waiter's nice, there's these very like tangible things. But when you're in the digital space, it's more so like, was this easy to navigate?
Mm.
Was I able to like find what I needed quickly? And so I find in terms of design principles, there's a lot of interesting crossover.
I love this idea of like that you're talking about iterations, because I think that kind of applies to anything we do in life, and just this idea of like it takes many times, and it's easy to think like, okay, that time was a waste, that time was a waste, but it's really not, because those are literally the steps from like a staircase that get you to where you would be, because if you hadn't created those first versions, you wouldn't have the final step.
Or just not as good of a final result. There's a reason we prototype, whether you're building like a custom kitchen, right? Or we just did like a restaurant, we had some custom furniture built, right? So there's a design process, there's sketching it, there's asking questions of how much seating they need and how much space we want between seating, and making sure there's not going to be weird traffic through like people getting in and out. And for the digital space, that is like what we call wireframes and prototyping, right? So you don't immediately just like dig into like building these code heavy things. You want to start very simple and start to ask the right questions and create kind of these rougher versions. So almost like a sketch or a rendering in the physical space are these prototypes. And sometimes you're amazing, like you can have like a user test it. Oftentimes it's just like your stakeholders or team. um but it's the same thing. Like in anything that we do, it's best to, you want to sharpen your knife for 3 hours before you, or your axe before you actually like go to cut, right? You're going to save yourself time, money, especially in interiors, right? You have construction. So if you, think you want to lay out something one way and make a last minute decision, that can be very costly. Um, in terms of digital, maybe a little bit easier, but it's still hours, right?
Oh
So
yeah.
time, especially in interiors, like sustainably wise, a lot of times what we deal with is like waste mitigation. There's a lot more moving parts for me in the physical space in terms of like,
Wow.
the actual labor that's going to be doing it, the transportation, for me, it's one of the biggest industries that has a ton of waste. So I think it's interesting to have a lot of moving parts and what I call like parameters, but truly they're challenges. In the digital, I think the issues and obstacles there are that there's a lot of saturation. And you have multiple generations using maybe the same tool. And so keeping across the board accessibility is a big thing for me. And in terms of neurodesign, which is basically how neuroscience and design affect each other. There's a lot of interesting data that we can find, especially when people are having these very qualitative experiences, right? When you describe a space, usually, unless you're in the industry, like you have these very qualitative things of describing what you want. And so it can be hard to create like actual quantitative data, right, from these very emotional experiences. But with neuroscience and psychology, we can start to better understand like why people feel the way that they feel and what changes we can plan for and design for and prototype for so that every project informs the next in a better way.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you talk about this idea of bringing in neuroscience into this, and I learned a term from you called neurodesign. Can you
Mhm.
tell us what that means and why that matters?
Yeah, it's pretty much neurodesign is like design principles informed by neuroscience. I also think too, aside from just neuroscience in itself, there's also psychology and maybe sociology going on. But it's truly like how can, we take these goals that a client has. So maybe it's for people to come into their space and feel inspired, or maybe it's to optimize productivity, right?
Mhm.
For digital, that might be gaining trust in a product, right? So something that works well, it like solves their problem, right? That's what we're trying to do at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I think, sometimes in design, it can become very aesthetics driven. And for me, that's a huge component, but also data is a huge informer for like the decisions that we make. And if you can not only ask the right questions, but if you can collect some data out front or look at other similar projects and look at the data for how that performed 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, you can just kind of build upon kind of the work that you may have done or frankly other people. Because there's some people in a lab, that hook people up to their brain up to stuff and they say, look at these colors or do this, whatever. And that's also great research. And then we also have businesses, right? That you can kind of look at their ROI and see like, did this renovation actually make them money? Or did this UX UI revamp of their digital product actually, was it worth it? Right. And like, are people just enjoying the app more? Are they moving quicker through it and solving their problem more? There's so many questions to be asked, and there's always so much information to be learned. And I think what's fun for me is to be able to hear from clients and their users. One thing I'm really passionate about is not just doing a project and like walking away and being like, hope that was great. um, because obviously I wouldn't do something if I didn't think it was, but 1 year down the road or 3 years or 5 years, asking them like, is this still working for you? Right? Is this space still working? Are people still as delighted today as they were then? I had the joy of redoing a website that was one of my first websites that I ever did for an art studio that I had worked with when I was young. And it worked for them for 10 years very well. It helped their business ROI improve, not only on the back end where the potters were able to like teach classes and have a really good back end system, but also the community was able to quickly, find these classes, understand what they were signing up for, and sign up. And just this year we revamped it. We kept it simple because these, they're artisans. They're not software engineers that are running this. They need it to be easy for them to use. And so we kind of revamped their booking system, how that looked, and made it more easy to understand. We added some new information because some of what the classes entailed had changed as they had, learned through their feedback. And we prioritized in terms of their business what was the best for their ROI. Um, and to me, it's just it's really cool to be able to hear 10 years down the road how the last thing we did worked. And throughout the years, I kind of kept touch and to actually be able to like improve on that. And it was nice because it was a pretty quick project. We didn't have to change too much, luckily, but to me, it was kind of that thought of how can we always be improving? Because to me, like what I designed 10 years ago is probably not the same as today. And so that was kind of a delight to be able to have the opportunity to enhance and redo my work.
Absolutely. And you talk about this idea of like making something easy to use, which I really like. And that's kind of that user experience. But also, when we think about maybe leveraging this neuro design or this idea of how we create a space and how we shape the spaces around us, how can that reduce stress in our life, aka
Mhm.
making it easier, or increase our productivity?
Yeah. I am very happy to be able to have consulted on different projects. And one of my favorite ones, because there's a very quick cycle and very busy cycle of the way it works, is a boutique hotel. And part of that, when we were designing it, was like, how can we, and I think this applies to people's homes. Whenever I consult residential, I use very similar principles because to me, in my space, I need easy storage, right?
Yep.
Especially if you're like, these are kind of, I say short term, but yeah, like maybe you're staying there a month, maybe you're staying there a week. So even in my own home, I do this, but very good storage. Storage is actually accessible. So if you have high cabinets, there's got to be some drop down mechanism, right? Even sliding drawers, like these very easy
Mm,
things,
okay.
um,
Yeah.
also work for like a hotel. Like if you're going to store an appliance in a micro kitchen and it's super high, no one's going to be able to utilize it. The other thing too is like, for example, just in terms of physical space, bathrooms, one of the
Mhm.
spaces that I think we all hate to clean, but like need to be cleaned the most.
Yeah.
Reducing grout lines, which down the road also reduces chances of water
Mm,
damage. Having drains that are easy to clean and less likely to be unclogged. Um, Bringing tile up a little bit so that you don't have like white molding that you're dealing with. And so the reason I bring up the hotel is, every week or every month they're doing this kind of turn down service, right? And
mhm,
in people's home, that may be their Sunday or that may be their spring cleaning.
mhm,
Um, but being able to understand what the space is being used for in the
mm.
first place and how you need it to be used will inform everything else. Like I said, spending more time up front, not simulating, but like mentally imagining
Yeah.
how a space is going to be used and to ask the pressing questions of what people's priorities are. Like a lot of times in homes, maybe we're modifying for accessibility, right? So that looks very different for maybe someone that has kids. And so for me, that's asking questions. But to me, those questions allow people to be more productive because if their space works for them,
Yeah.
they're not constantly having to clean. It takes out these kind of minutes that maybe a space is easier to clean or it's easier to organize it. It's easier to move through, right?
Mm.
Um, for me with apps and just kind of back end systems, it's really like having systems that um especially too with like neurodiversity, they need to be intuitive. I think sometimes things are either too cluttered, right? And this could be a space too. But sometimes things are too complex and sometimes things are maybe oversimplified that there's not intuitive cues. And so
Mm.
it's really finding a balance for again like who that user is, what that functionality is. I think that at least for me, I've luckily spent a lot of hours observing how people do these things. And so that's why that's kind of my specialty. But like unlimiting necessary steps
Yeah.
is a big one. Like kind of just to cut steps out, but not the most important ones. Like understand what your priorities are or the most critical systems are for how you need your space to work, and lean into those and don't get too caught up in things that maybe don't support that.
Mm-hmm.
I think
When
it's
you're
easy.
talking about spaces that are like having a lot of things, in it, or easy to accessible or walk through, or whatever, I was thinking about like that pantry or that closet that's just like full of stuff, even in our own homes or in our office, right? And it's like every time you open it, you just like have that sinking feeling and you kind of want to just shut the
Close
door and
it
you don't
away.
really
Yeah.
face it. And I think it's like, it's almost more valuable to spend more time up front, like
Mm-hmm.
setting things up, to your point, in
Yeah.
a way that's easy and accessible, and getting organized and setting
Yeah.
up your space in a way that feels good, to then like make it easier and have more energy around it
Yeah.
in the long term.
Yeah, because if you have a coat closet with a rack, right? Maybe we call it spec, right? This builder grade, right? You've got like a GC that's a builder. And so they're like, this is going to be the cheapest, simplest way to
Mhm.
do it, right?
Yeah.
Again, I'm all for simplicity, but it's not in the right places. So for example, like we right now we have a client with 3 kids and everything for them in terms of their remodel is also about having it be like a little bit more elevated from when they moved in and used their old furniture, but also we're kind of moving around some things and focusing on storage systems because they have closets that have a rack and have no storage. So literally you end up just like hanging some stuff and everything else goes on the ground, right?
Mhm.
But if you can build like cabinetry, and it doesn't have to be expensive, there are really simple solutions. It's more so thinking again about like, what is it that you're storing? Is this like sports stuff? Is it accessories like purses and all these things? Like, it's really like, what do you need to use it for?
Mhm.
Um, and then literally just build around that. Because yeah, it's even right now there's a pottery studio, for example, where she just kind of had some shelving and we're doing like all custom shelving with a custom workbench because that's another example where aside from it being more productive for her to work
Mhm.
long term, we have like makers, especially there's a physical component to where it can degrade your back and your shoulders.
Mhm.
And so we've put like big buckets of clay and boxes on, we've made dollies, and these dollies fit in under the workbench so they have a designated space. And her workbench is the right height for her so she can work without fatigue. Even to like having shelving in the right place so she can throw on her wheel and set it to the side versus getting up and walking every piece over to a shelf 5 feet away. It's right next to her. She just turns, right? And that in terms of productivity is like saving a lot of time if you're doing that, for hours. So again, there's a lot of different applications that we work with for this. Even storefronts, like looking at dead stock, understanding what their users are actually buying and having that be at the forefront and easy to find, because it's a win-win, right?
Mm.
So to me, UX is all about, first of all, like research and asking right questions, and then the design follows from there. And I think things like neurodesign and accessibility standards and all these great principles that people have already set up, um, can help to inform the front end. And then on the back end, for me as a designer working project to project, every project I do, I'm obsessed with like, how is it still? Are you still liking it? Like checking reviews online of
Yeah.
people's completely unbiased, they don't know me, like seeing what they feel about the space, is really cool for me. And I think, just lets me continue to learn and get better.
That's awesome. And I like that you incorporate like kind of this occupational therapy side of it as well, of like not just what's productive or easy, but also what's going to protect your body as well for your health. So that's really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, even with spaces, like we historically have built with a lot of materials that aren't great for our health. And I think now with sustainability really coming into design, people are looking at those things. But there's a lot of renovations, like we've worked on some historical landmarks where we really need to figure out how to improve the air quality.
Mhm.
Even to like, there's a neurodiversity expo that we're partnering on. There's like 4 around Denver, and part of it is like this expo is a super stimulating space for most people. So aside from just physical, disabilities or needs, you also have, people that have sensory issues, right? And I think
Mhm.
most people have sensory issues.
Yeah.
Um, even with digital space, and a lot of that
Oh.
is like lighting, color, contrast, um sound, right? Acoustics in a space is huge. And there are spaces that we go into or apps we use, and we're not really gravitating towards them, and we don't come back. And that's what I look at, is like, why aren't people coming back? Or what's the point that they click out of this? Or why are they only staying in, I don't want to build a restaurant that someone is like screaming to get out of. Maybe some people do, but like, if you're building a nicer space like a hotel, you want it to be an experience that people are coming back to. And they always think, oh, anytime I pass through here, I just had such a good time. And that's, of course, like customer service and maybe cleaning systems and things like that, and building a space that's easy to clean. But it's also just like, for most people, it's like, it was pretty and it worked well for me. And that's
Mm.
how they'll describe it. And
Yeah.
for me, there's so much more beyond that, uh,
Mhm.
that we're again trying to understand. And like I said, it all comes back to taking a qualitative, you may have a client that says, I want this ROI. They have all these like very quantitative KPIs they're trying to hit. And then when you ask them, well, what does that look like to you? There's these very qualitative things that they describe, maybe. Or even when you're asking their user, right? They kind of just say, well, I want it to be easy to use. And so we sit there and we go, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Because there is an answer. There is an answer. It's just digging into it.
And how can some of those things that you mentioned, like lighting, sound, colors, layout, affect decision making and our cognitive clarity?
Yeah, I love that question. That's a great question. I think when people are strained or overstimulated, they're not going to think as well. We have
Mm.
kind of this, there's a design for health initiative out of CU, and the whole thought is kind of like using design in healing spaces. So it could be a hospital. It could also be an office space, right? Where people are making
Mhm.
pretty critical decisions.
Yeah.
Maybe a home office, even, I don't know. And what we found is that really strenuous lighting, Also too, like especially for women, a lot of commercial spaces are crazy cold for us because our body runs differently. That can affect how you make decisions, like comfort, right? Once you're in, if you're in a comfortable, you're not in fight or flight mode, right? You have clarity. Things like I think lighting, acoustics, and what we call like personalized space. So again, that might be like temperature. Being able to kind of either change that or offer the best thing for the general. And to me, the general does include maybe more sensitive populations to those things, because if you include the highly sensitive, the people that aren't as much are still going to appreciate it. They probably just won't even notice it. And the highly sensitive people will really notice it.
Oh yeah.
So even offices, we found that like cubicles, a lot of workspaces are being gutted to become like hybrid, right? You kind of have like, if people are coming into the office, they're usually coming to collaborate, or they're coming to have focus space that is out of their, maybe their home office with their dog and their two kids. And also there's kind of an amenity part, right? So what we're finding is most offices are going from like one conference room and all these cubicle workspaces, to more so what we call modular desks. So maybe they're not someone's permanent desk, but they use, it's equipped for most
Sure.
of the roles. And then
Yeah.
kind of conference room maybe, but maybe it's more of a collaborative space where it's not so stuffy. It's somewhere where people can like lay out stuff. There's whiteboards, like it's kind of encouraging more of a collaboration versus one person proposing. And then also there's things where like in terms of, you said for clarity, if people have tough decisions, having a couple of like R&R places. So that may be like, I've seen some offices where you kind of, maybe not a nap pod, but you just have like places to go sit, right?
Yeah.
They're kind of
Right.
secluded and it's not a desk, you know what I mean? It's kind of a little nested place, a comfortable spot to take a break, right? Because breaks are critical for good work. Sometimes those thinking points um are great to stand back, the shower thoughts, right? So yeah, I think that sensory, trying to design for the senses so people aren't in a fight or flight mode and they can feel calm and comfortable and think clearly is key.
Yeah. I love that you pointed out like the fight or flight mode, and just kind of like where our central nervous system is kind of at and where that volume knob is at, right? Because I know for me, like when I'm working from home and I like have a cozy blanket over my lap,
Yeah,
I've got a warm cup of
maybe too cozy.
coffee. Yeah, and I've got, a candle going and I've got nice music and I have nice aesthetics in my apartment. So I'm like
Yeah,
looking at things that inspire me, like I can get so much done and well,
yeah,
right? But then like, when you go to the office, if it's cold and
yeah.
or there's a lot of people there and there's a lot of
Loud.
noise and stimulation, I'm like just naturally gonna like retreat into my brain and not work as fast or as creative because
Yeah,
it's more of just like, oh, what's going on? Like your
yeah,
brain has to then process this other stuff versus just like, being cozy, being, not too warm, but like, not too cold either. Like, a good, cozy temperature and, nice music. I don't know. I like relaxing music like all day
yeah,
long. So
yeah.
that's just me.
Lo-fi, right? That's why people love like the lo-fi YouTube. Yeah, the Paris, the sympathetic nervous system, it's interesting because we don't have like, we have these mechanisms that are obviously like they're from when we had natural predators, right? So they keep us safe. And
Yeah.
obviously we still have predators today, but like we still have threats. But day to day, it's interesting because we live in such a busy, stimulating space, even
Yeah.
talking about digital, right? Like having spaces to focus, or even like clear UI. Like I'm sure you've dealt with very busy like UI where you're trying to get something done and you're like, this is too complex, it's not intuitive, versus when you have really really simple stuff, like good design you should notice, but you do feel a change. You're like, oh, this isn't this big daunting, task. When you have like a calm to you and things feel intuitive, spaces in general, um, you can work better through them. But yeah, I think too, there's also things with productivity where we know that like certain colors can make people feel inspired versus if we're in like a healing space like a hospital, right? We're not going to use the same tones, even kind of like art, like those visual cues are different. But we have found overall like things like biophilia, biophilic design is great for healing. It's also great for focus. I think we tried to industrialize spaces too much. Um, because of cost, and it doesn't have to be cost. Again, I think there's a space for engineers and there's a space for designers.
Mhm.
Beautiful. There's a beauty when it works well together. But yeah, like right now we have work deadlines, right? We may have people having office chatter, and even though you're in a cubicle, like you visually have horse blinders, but you have fluorescent lighting, chit
Mm.
chatter, and you're freezing cold versus if you kind of have a focus pod. Maybe you have, right, maybe you don't have your own thermostat, but maybe you have like you said, a blanket.
Mhm.
Most there's this thing called well standard in spaces, or and it's about well-being focused aside from sustainability, and the biggest thing are like personalized temperatures and lighting. So task lamps so people can control their lighting, a blanket or a fan, right? Maybe you're frankly having like a hot flash or you're
Yeah.
anxious, right? And all of a sudden you're really
Yeah.
hot.
Yeah.
Um, and someone else could be cold. That's the thing, is creating spaces that are modular, or again built for the hypersensitive.
Yeah. Mhm.
Um, and then obviously then the general may notice it, but they'll still enjoy it. So I think that it's something that neurodesign affects a lot that we see. Even when I consult with apps and maybe even e-commerce shopping, right? It's like how it's about asking the right questions of what the end goal is. And maybe it's quantitative, right? Maybe it is qualitative, but it's trying to create something visually um, and functionally that supports both of those things, the aesthetic and the function.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, I know in my office I have like all these things. I've got my little sun lamp. So like
yeah,
my happy light. I've got that because
what you need in Colorado.
yeah, I do. And the I've got like blankets I can put on my lap, and I have like essential oils and lotions for like, if I want like a relaxing scent,
Yeah,
and all these things just to make sure that like and I have my heater and I have a fan, and so like all these things that I have to make sure like for myself I'm like, okay, when if I'm going to be in the office, I'm going to be comfortable because I know myself that I won't be fully there and fully focused if I'm like sitting there shivering and like feeling the goosebumps on my
mine's always
arms.
when I'm cold. Yeah, cold
Oh,
is a huge noise. I can kind of tune out, but again, everyone's different, right? Some people are like, "Oh, it doesn't bother me," or it makes me more productive, right? And for
yeah.
me, I'm like, if I'm shivering and I'm cold, it's not gonna work for me. Um, but yeah, I think that there's a ton of just improvement that we can do at home in our own spaces, and even for business owners. To me, when you have um, a designer come in, it really shows that you care about your customer's experience. Because I had someone that a client that purchased a hardware store, um, and his whole philosophy was, how can I redesign this? Because people could shop on my online site, right? They're like digitizing all the inventory, which hadn't been done. And that's huge too. So people can save time. Maybe they don't have to
Mhm.
come in. But for the people that do come in, right? How do we make this like, these people work construction, right? These are mainly GCs and construction workers. So like, how can we make this like a somewhat enjoyable experience compared to like going to an overstimulating hardware store, right? For new users to have people come back and be familiar. And so customer service was a huge thing, but also like we have places to sit. We have a help desk that's very clear and pointed out. The way that the inventory and rows are arranged has changed. Checkout is in a space. It was like right when you walked in the door, so you had people entering, exiting, and checking out, and it was like a zoo in the middle of the
Huh.
store. So we've done stuff like that and just also injected some beauty, right? Just some like fun things to look at while you're shopping that also, you know, from a ROI standpoint, leads you through the store very
Yeah.
nicely. So you can find what you want, but you also may be more driven to like check things out. We also made spaces like bathrooms, right? Great for both genders.
Mhm.
And maybe a hardware store that's a little more both gender or all gender friendly. You know what I mean? Because I think too sometimes that can be daunting for women or just minorities in general, especially with where this is located. So to me it was, you know, it was something that he didn't just buy it and keep it as it was and maybe get rid of dead stock. Like he really, from digitizing inventory and making it easy to shop online for maybe a younger generation or people that knew what they wanted and didn't need to go in and ask for help. And then he's made like really designated places for people that are having like pipes cut, keys made, things like that.
Mhm.
There's a complete just like customer service area, which wasn't a thing anymore at the time. There's a paint desk. Before it was just like kind of an aisle, right? So now someone will be there to help if it's needed. And to me, that's a great example too of from digital to physical, someone really caring about their user experience and the journey and having that pay off for them, you know, especially with brick and mortars, like you have to be competitive with, you know, hopefully you have a digital space too. I've also come across some brick and mortars where I was like, you need a website. Um, but you know, it's something that as our, especially I think past COVID, right, or post COVID, has become hard for people to get people in the door. And I think people are looking more for that shopping experience now too.
Yeah.
Like they're craving elevated experiences. They'll pay for it. You could go to a restaurant that doesn't have that great of food and you'll pay the price because it was a beautiful ambiance, right? But maybe the, you know, place down the road did maybe it didn't have, you know, a great ambiance, but maybe you're not taking your first date there. You know what I mean? Like there's a reason, or maybe you're not celebrating there. Maybe that's just like your go-to passing through place. Um, but there's places where we can really see um, you know, that kind of return on investment for people, especially office spaces too, in terms of in homes, right? Like we spend our time in these third places, which are important. But our home and our office is fortunately, unfortunately, where we spend a lot of time. And so being able to have people enjoy it is important.
I couldn't agree more. And it's just so interesting how all of these things affect different parts of us and how we function that we might have not even thought of. I'm just wondering, like, how can we start to like take all this together and bring it
Mhm.
all, full circle and really start to optimize our spaces, whether it's at home or in work and business, whether it's we have like a busy life or we just have a lot going on. How can we start to optimize that so we can feel better, get more done, have more energy, and just honestly have more fun and feel more excited about it?
Yeah. I think like especially if you are a work from home person, like myself, having like a designated workspace is really
Mhm.
nice. I think
Yeah.
oftentimes it becomes the kitchen counter, which is fine, or your bed, which is fine, if that's what works for you. And sometimes day to day, right? That's what works. But having like a we like zoning, right? So, you know, we know when we're in bed, that's sleep time. And
Mhm.
maybe it's good to kind of keep it that way, unless you're sick and maybe you're still able to work. But I think definitely at home, creating zones and kind of systems. Like if you have, I think one of bathrooms and kitchens are the best place to
Mhm.
really think about organization aside from your closet. Maybe that's a
Yeah.
bit easier. I think kitchens have a huge ability, especially if you have a spec build and you just have cabinets with shelving, to look at drawers, to look at, especially upper cabinets in your petite, having pull down mechanisms. It's also safer, right? Versus like straining yourself. So you're actually using those spaces better. Putting, maybe your dishes where you're going to put your dishes next to your dishwasher to make it easier and quicker to do these kind of like redundant things
Mhm.
is great. To put a trash can by where your prep station is.
Mhm.
All these there's all these small details that we can do for bathrooms. For me, for the most part, it's about cleaning and
Yeah.
making a space that not only is less likely to have water damage, but is easy to clean. I love putting the valve for a shower somewhere that you're not going to get wet as you're figuring out the temperature.
Yeah.
That's like a really simple thing.
That's a good
Yeah, it's like there's all these like small details that are helpful. I think in terms of productivity, even to like a laundry room, if you have kids or even myself that's just dirty and probably wears two outfits a day at least, having like it optimized to maybe like, I know a lot of people where our dining table becomes like where we fold. If
one.
you have the space to do it, if you can, having a small space for folding, maybe you have a clothesline, right? There's
Yeah.
there's little things like that in the home that you can do. In terms of office or home office spaces, I think again having some small amenities like personalized temperature, maybe you bring a blanket to work. You can do that yourself, right?
Yeah.
Or a fan, depending on how you run.
Mhm.
Maybe you're someone too that having headphones in, maybe you're not listening to music, but there are things like that you can do. Um, aside from being the business owner, right? Optimizing your office for your employees is huge. But yeah, I think if it's you yourself and small changes that you can make, I would say do a digital declutter.
Mhm. Yes, that's a
Um, Try to get some like even if you can get small organizers for like your kitchen or your laundry room or wherever you're having like clutter build up and
Mhm.
purge.
Yes.
I think again it's
I love a
very
good purge.
easy. Yeah, it's so easy and I kind of have like, ADD to where if I can't see it, I don't know I have it,
Yeah.
right? So if you can kind of imagine, like, I want to lay this out like a store, like I can't be cramming stuff behind stuff, right?
Mhm.
Which tends to happen. Like,
Yep.
really think about I always say pull everything out and look at what if you may have like 10 things that do the same thing.
Mm.
Even with kids' toys, I think like you could have 20 board games and realistically you're only playing like your favorites or yeah, like
Mhm.
you don't need all, like just make
Yeah.
it easy, right? So I think making life easier for yourself and consuming only what you need uh and organizing the rest is huge because when we have to think too much, all of us only have so much like decision capacity. So this
Yeah.
could be your closet and maybe your fashion is like your joy, but like for me, I love fashion, but I also like if I get too much into it or I try to make like things work that I know don't work. Like I
Yeah.
I have my go-to if it's comfortable, I know I'm going to wear it. Of course, there's like formal stuff, but I
Mhm.
think if you can reduce decision fatigue
Yeah.
and also make the tasks that you do the most in your week or your day, make those really efficient, you'll save time and you'll save cognitive load, which is very important. I think even with digital, unsubscribe from anything that's not serving you, right? We have just overload nowadays of buying this will make your life easier, whatever. And sometimes it's just like simplifying can make life easier. And putting the right tools in place can make life easier.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for this. This has been super awesome. And I know you have a newsletter where we can get more tips on creating cohesive, productive spaces. Do you
Yeah.
want to tell us about that? And we'll link that below as well.
Yeah, I have an email newsletter. It's on my website, which I post blogs and just maybe it's an article I find interesting and maybe it's applicable tips. Usually those are kind of showcased in my email, aside from if I'm doing any events in the community. And then our social media, our Instagram is more of kind of just the fun projects that we do. And if I think too, people are sharing amazing things in the design community. I love to collaborate there as well. So it's just at Sentio.design. Our website has where you can subscribe to our newsletter. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sydney.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for braving the inside of your mind with me. The better we understand ourselves, the more deeply we understand the world, and as our awareness grows, life just gets better and better. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave a review and share this with anyone else you think could benefit from listening. A quick reminder that the content shared in this podcast is for informational purposes only. I am not a licensed therapist, and the discussions here are not a substitute for professional advice. If you're dealing with a specific issue or need personalized guidance, please consult with a qualified professional. Your well-being is important, and this podcast is simply a platform for sharing insights and experiences. I appreciate you spending this time with me. Until next time.